Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we embark on a 10-day program that's coinciding with the Conference of Parties that is taking place as we speak in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. I want to just say as we begin that Zoom had an upgrade over the weekend. Many of you probably have been fiddling with your Zoom accounts and downloading this and that. So we've had some Zoom issues, and as a result of that, many of the people that join the Zoom call haven't gotten their link from us. If you manage to get it and you know people who don't have it, please send your link. And any of you who are looking on Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn, one of our streaming channels, you can use the link from last week because the same link works every day. So we apologize, but that's just, that's Zoom. Occasionally Zoom happens, and we'll get it sorted out and I think be running smoothly again by tomorrow. That's one of the challenges of a interconnected world through technology. The issues that we're going to be dealing with over the next 10 days through the 18th of November are perhaps the most critical issues that the human race has ever faced. And that's a very strong statement. But up until 30 or 40 years ago, all the turbulence of human history, all the Sturm und Drang of political, economic, geostrategic affairs, all took place within a relatively stable climate. You know, your Earth history, the last 12,000 years actually have been one of the most stable, even, and conducive to growth climate eras in the entire history of our planet, going back 4.5 billion years. And the human race has proceeded to destabilize the very climate that gave rise to human civilization. Just since the 1800s and really the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, global temperatures have risen 1.1 degrees centigrade. 50% of that has been in the last 30 years. The last 8 years have been the warmest consecutive years on history. Sea level rise due to melting climate has doubled in the last 30 years. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has issued warning after warning. And in its 6th report issued in 2021, it stated that we are now in uncharted territories, which the Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations said meant essentially code red. We're now in a situation with climate that is no longer avoidable. We are now in escalating turbulence, and the extraordinary reality is that our governments are doing essentially nothing. By and large, they're controlled by the fossil fuel industry. Massive subsidies in countries all over the world go to the oil industry. 80% of our economies are in some ways connected to petroleum, and we are slowly going off the cliff. While, as Greta Thurnberg said last year, around the Conference of Parties number 26 that happened in Glasgow, what the governments do is basically blah, blah, blah. And that's what we have to confront as COP27 begins in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's more blah, blah, blah. And I think the conclusion that the environmental movement and most of the world made last year was that the governments are determined not to do anything. And therefore, it's up to us, the people of the world, to take the kind of action that is required. And I think it's a fair statement to say that COP27 is doomed to fail before it starts, because there is no indication at all in the face of the worst crisis in human history that our governments are going to do anything more than protect fossil fuels. And because of the war in Ukraine, the climate issue is essentially off the table in any kind of meaningful way with either Russia, China, India, and even Europe, certainly the United States. So we have a problem, Houston, and we need to understand that as deeply as it is true. And that is why in this spirit, Humanity Rising is going to be dedicating each day to bringing us live reports from Sharm el-Sheikh through our partnership with Facing Future TV. We're also going to be hearing from young people through our partnership with Oz Green and Youth Leading the World. So we're going to be having live reports from Egypt and live reports from young people, because I think it is our young people who really now need to lead in an unprecedented way. That's our essential program. We'll get started in a moment, but before we do, let us pause as we always do, and let us just come into coherence. In all the turbulence that is our world, with climate change spinning out of control, with escalating turbulence at almost every level of human society, and stresses now omnipresent in every country in the world, the most important thing that we can do is just stay calm and keep our internal equilibrium. And that's why on Humanity Rising, for those of you who may be new, each day we just take a couple of minutes and breathe together. And we do it in a very specific way. The most ancient form of breathing, and one that modern science says is the most effective way to bring coherence and equilibrium and optimization to our bodies, is to breathe in for 5.5 seconds, breathe out for 5.5 seconds, for 5.5 breaths in a minute. That brings in 5.5 liters of air. It's an extraordinary way to breathe. So you're going to see an art card come up with a 5-pointed star, which shows the orbital pathway of Earth and Venus around the sun. And you'll hear a tone, a bell. When you hear the first bell, slowly breathe in. You hear the second bell, slowly breathe out. We're going to take 10 breaths, and then we'll begin our program. Thank you, everyone. Again, apologies for Zoom, but let us begin. Georg? Thank you, everyone. It's always good to breathe together, no matter what's happening, whether it's Zoom or climate or various issues that we have to deal with day by day. I want to now invite my good friend and colleague, Sue Lennox, who is the co-founder with her husband, Colin, of Oz Green in 1992, which to date has involved over 1 million people in countries all over the world. She's a former high school science teacher. She's won a number of awards for social entrepreneurship, received an award for one of the most influential women in Sydney in 2007, and recently one of the most important senior citizens there in New South Wales in Australia. She will tell us a little bit about Oz Green and what's in store, because she has been organizing with Youth Leading the World to bring young people into our programs every day starting tomorrow. And so Sue, double thanks, because she's in Australia and it is now 2:00 in the morning for Sue, but nevertheless, her gallantry is undeniable, and she's joining us. So Sue, welcome to Humanity Rising, and tell us about Oz Green and Youth Leading the World and what we have in store for our community over the next 10 days.
Wonderful, Jim. Thank you. It's an incredible privilege to be here, even if it is 3 a.m. in the morning. As I said, some of my best thinking has happened at that time of day. I'm just going to do a screen share so I can show you some photos as I speak. Get the right. Oops. Sorry, just finding the correct thing. There it is. It was where I should be looking for it. There. So it's a beautiful night here. There's a glorious full moon shining and just about to set over our mountain. And I'm coming to you from Gumbaynggirr country, which I feel incredibly privileged to live on. And I want to begin by giving my love and respect to this country and to this culture and to this community and to the elders and the wise ones who have come before us, who are with us now and are yet to be born, knowing that they're all ever present. This morning, I'd like to have a quick chat with you about my journey from Brookvale to Benares, about the Youth Leading the World program, and then introduce some inspiring young people that you will meet over the coming 2 weeks, and finish with a little mention of the upcoming Global Online Youth Summit on the 16th and 17th and 18th of November. So here is my home. I live on a community with my children and grandchildren, and we live off-grid, and I grow a substantial amount of food together with my wider family here in an area near Bellingen in New South Wales on the east coast of Australia. So from Brookvale to Benares, I just want to acknowledge next to me in this photo is Professor Veerbhadra Mishra, also known as Mahanchi, the late Professor Mishra, who was the founder of the Clean Ganges campaign. And next to him, my beautiful late husband, Colin, who is the co-founder of Oz Green. So my background is as a science teacher. And during the 80s, I was working in Sydney. When I began teaching in the 70s, I was really concerned about the way that young people would shut down when you got onto some of the big social issues and challenges that we face in these times. And so really my life journey has been one of finding ways that we can face up to the truth and move through it to find action. So I was working as a science teacher at Freshwater High School, and there was a big pollution event in our local river, Greendale Creek, and tens of thousands of fish are lying dead on the water. And I said to the Year 9 class I had at that time, what can we do to change our community so that something like this doesn't happen again? And that was a strategic question, a skill that I'd learned from the amazing American social activist Fran Peavy. And what I saw was a group of year 9, 15-year-olds come alive with ideas. And I recognised that we were really onto something. So we settled down and did 4 things. The young people went out and interviewed the 1,500 businesses in the Brookvale industrial area that surrounded the school. They began testing the water because our local government had told us, don't worry, it was a natural event. And we knew that wasn't true. And so we realised we actually had to learn the science of water testing ourselves. They also started doing bush regeneration work all around the edge of the river, and they made a video. The thing that's really significant about this is that in the process of doing this, I watched these young people go from being shy and uncertain of themselves to becoming outspoken and standing up on national television and stating their case. And at the same time, I saw them have a profound influence on our community. And I realised that young people are incredible motivators and educators of adults. And so that began a journey that went way further than I had ever imagined. And people started to come to the school to see what we were doing. The school became a centre of excellence in environmental education. The video the kids made got a UN Media Peace Prize. And I found myself being invited to go to India to help with the Clean Ganges campaign. And so in January 92, my husband Colin and I headed over to India, having never travelled outside Australia. And that experience was a complete life changer for me. The breathtaking beauty of this river system and culture just, profoundly influenced me. And at the same time, we took with us water testing equipment, and for the first time actually measured what the pollution load was going into the Ganges in Varanasi. And I just want to say that's a full colour photo, just to give you a sense of the colour of the water. And we did fecal coliform testing. Fecal coliform are the bacteria that live in the intestinal tracts of warm-blooded animals. Their presence in the water means there's sewage or human poo or cattle poo in the water. And we found readings that were astounding. We found a range from 50,000 to 5 million per 100 mils of water. Now, in Australia, we have a standard that the fecal coliform load is 0 per 100 mils for drinking, less than 150 for bathing, and less than 1,000 for swimming and boating. And I was seeing children going down to drink from the river. I was seeing people coming down to pray at the river and taking holy sips. And I can put it no other way to say that this broke my heart. It was me seeing the global situation firsthand. I knew that there was a massive problem with water pollution, but this was seeing poverty up front. And I realised that what we'd started in Australia was way beyond importance that I had even begun to imagine. So Colin and I spent the next year contemplating our journey, and we decided we'd actually leave our work as teachers, sell our home, move our young family in with Cole's mum, and set up Oz Green working out of her garage. So that was in 1992. And we became a registered charity here in Australia. Our focus on citizen science, transformative learning and leadership, community-driven change, and connecting change makers across the world. And over the last 3 decades, we've worked in over 1,600 communities around the world, involving around 1 million people. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit about some of the young people that we have had the privilege to work with. And in particular, the Youth Leading the World program. We realised about 15 years ago that times were getting worse and worse and worse, and we actually had to find a way of working where we could do things in a much more accessible way. and change our focus to training local facilitators so that they could lead the program in their own area. And we found a way of doing this and maintaining impact that led us to reduce the cost per person by 90%, reduce our carbon footprint because we were no longer travelling all over the place, and increase our reach by 10, and connecting youth globally. So we were pretty tough with that, about 100-fold increase in the way that we work. And to date, we've trained 1,080 Youth Leading the World facilitators from 100 regions globally. So let me introduce you to just some of the young people that you're going to meet in the coming weeks. Oh, and we picked up a few awards along the way. I just wanted to first talk about Norma Vecarito, who is in El Salvador. Unfortunately, I couldn't get someone to translate Spanish, and so I'm just going to tell her story for her briefly. Norma came and did a 5-week climate resilience leadership program here in Australia with a bunch of other young people from Central America. And during the time that she was here, there were horrific cyclones taking place in her community back home, and some children drowned in that process. And she realised that what she wanted to do was to create a safe place for young people, but also a place where they could come and learn about how to grow food and how to look after the earth. And she had no other resources. She turned her own home into that centre, La Casa Verde. And to this day, 12 years later, she continues to operate that program. Okay. So some of you who were present last year would have met the team in Sierra Leone. We've been partnering with Climate Change and Consciousness, and here is Alpha Kagbo and Aisha Kuate, who are probably amongst the most inspiring and dedicated young people I have met, and I've met a lot of young people. And over the last few years, they have enrolled over 300 young people across their country and got stuck into the business of planting trees and creating gardens and educating people about climate change. Alpha said to me that they used to think that climate change was punishment from God, and are very grateful now to have the science of climate change clear. And this year, they have actually set up an NGO themselves. Youth Leading the World Sierra Leone is now registered with a goal of uniting youth in Sierra Leone to tackle the major challenges of deforestation, climate change, and poverty. And they will be joining you live tomorrow. On Wednesday, we have Nick Allardyce, who is the CEO of change.org. And I first met Nick in 2004 when he did our youth leadership program. And he tells me that there was a profound impact of that program, and it changed him from being a young man who was cruising and a bit too cool for school to really getting stuck into the thing that he was most concerned about, which was apathy and creating change, that saw him on a magnificent journey that led him to finally becoming the CEO of change.org nearly 20 years later. Well, not quite even that. And then on Thursday, we're going to meet Abigail Quick, who is the co-CEO of Ceres in Guatemala, and a Mayan youth leader who has taken the steps to really get her community engaged and reach out through Ceres to young people throughout Guatemala. Some incredible stories about the impact that they have been having as winners of the UNESCO award in 2015, and her own personal journey. And on, what are we up to? Friday, we're going to meet Vanessa Moskal, who is a young Australian. And she was actually one of the young people who was in school when we set up Youth Leading the World, and joined with us and said, look, I'm absolutely with you on this. really get this out there. And so she's been a Youth Leading the World facilitator since 2009. And she tried a lot to influence local government. And as a young woman, she found that incredibly difficult. And so she stood for election and became the youngest ever elected representative to local government. And then the following week, because we've got youth summits happening all over at the moment, you're going to get direct report backs from those young people as they decide what it is that they're going to do to create change. And I'd like to finish with letting you know about the upcoming Global Online Youth Summit. If you know any young leaders in your communities, we'd love to have them involved. If you go to our website, osgreen.org/YLTW, you'll find lots of additional information there and how you can register. Or you can shoot me an email at sue@osgreen.org.au. Thanks a lot, everyone, and I look forward to connecting with you over the coming weeks and beyond. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you so much, Sue. This is marvelous. We're very excited to hear from the various youths that you've identified. I know it's very, very late for you, so you should probably go back to bed. And we'll see Sue every couple of days during the course of the program, and various people from Osgreen and Youth Leading the World. So thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you, Jim. It's a real treat to be part of this community and have a really good time. I'll watch the video.
Okay. And again, everyone, for those of you who are just coming in, we've had some Zoom issues due to the Zoom upgrade, etc. But we are sorting it out, and we just have to know that sometimes Zoom happens, and that's all okay. Now, one of the most exciting parts of the next 10 days is the fact that we're going to be joined as a co-moderator with me, Dr. Tamsin Woolley Barker, who has written a book I think it came out in 2017. I just read it, called Teeming. And it is on superorganisms and how very ancient species adapt and thrive in a very exciting way, that if we humans, who are also superorganisms, or at least could be, would learn from little things like ants and bees and other little creatures, we would do a lot better in solving our global problems, including climate change. She's an evolutionary anthropologist. She's the dean of Geoversity's school on these matters, and she's the founder of the Borrego Institute of Living Design in Southern California. And I invited her to give our opening keynote today, to set the stage, because I can't think of a book more salient to our current problematique than to learn from nature within a framework that is biomimicry at its best, but really showing how superorganisms can work together in ways that empower each and every participant in the superorganism to do the job that they can and need to do. So Tamsin will be providing our keynote today, and then every day for the next 10 days, Tamsin and I will be making various introductions and talking with the various speakers, because in addition to having live reports each day from Sharm el-Sheikh and listening to the youth from around the world that Sue and Osgreen have been organizing, we're also going to be having speakers each day that will tackle some aspect or another of the larger ecological challenges that we face. And Tamsin and I will seek to co-moderate and steer the program accordingly. So Tamsin, thank you so much for joining us, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Boy, inspiring morning already. That Sue is like got me all revved up already.
She's a force of nature. She's a total force of nature, Sue Lennox.
Oh yeah, and I see the same kinds of things with the kids that we work with at Geoversity. So yeah, I'll be talking a little bit about that. So yeah, I'll just dive right in. Okay, let's see. Gonna share my screen. If I can do that. Here we go. All right.
There we go.
Does anyone recognize this movie? I think it's Never Ending Story. And this is the swamp of sadness. And I feel like that's where we are. Like the kids that I talk to are just so, despairing. And so I really want to bring my perspective to them because we have solutions. We have lots of solutions. And, these are the kinds of solutions that we are talking about a lot, is these kinds of engineered solutions. But this is from Paul Hawken, Project Drawdown. And, you can see that only 4 of the top 15 solutions are actually STEM, actually engineered solutions. And the others are really more land-based and more socially based. So it gives us a little bit more perspective on the thing. And so, I'm a scientist, right? An evolutionary biologist, a population geneticist. And so I grew up in this kind of STEM, paradigm that we're using. And, and so those are the kinds of solutions we're finding. But if you look at this a little bit deeper, you see that number 6 and 7, educating girls and family planning, are actually bigger carbon reducers than the top number 1, the refrigerant management. So then you're starting to think about, more social things and things that we can do ourselves, because, not all of us are chemical engineers and mechanical engineers, and that all happens somewhere else. So I think this is really important for us to drop into what we can do in our communities. And what I think is really interesting about that 6 and 7, is that it shows us that the problems that we're facing with climate change are really the result of a legacy of dominance. And so we're going to get more into that. And, as an evolutionary biologist, I study these deep social patterns of what kind of species are we? What are we trying to be? And what's in the way? So you can see that, if allowed, women and girls would fulfill another role. And that's true for all of us, I think. I think we're all suffering from this legacy of dominance. And it takes a toll on our communities, and it takes a toll on our planet. So what I thought was interesting is here we're talking about these STEM solutions. And so I Googled the logos and just took a look. And if you look at these logos, I mean, they're fun. But if you look at them, what's missing from all of these? There's not a single living thing in any of them. So how are we supposed to deal with making the planet a better place to live if we're not even cognizant of life in our solution space? So when you look at these top 15 solutions again, you see that most of them are actually to do with land and the way that we live with land and the way that we eat and the way that we, live our lives. And so it really gives us a lot more agency to look at it like that, and to think about what can we do as individuals in our lives. And a lot of it has to do with the way that we live and relate to the land around us. So as an evolutionary biologist, I'm always looking at the way that change occurs and the way that resilience naturally emerges and the way that these ecosystems work. And the one thing that really stands out is that our solutions tend to be find the best number and scale up to it, right? Like you can see on this stem at the very top, there's the bullet, the target, like you hit the right number. And so that's kind of the paradigm we're looking at. In fact, all those are very interesting, achievement, number 1 leader, targeted efficiency, and these ladders of like hierarchies. So that's all very interesting to me that we're holding those up as things that we're striving for, and probably are preventing us from getting where we want to go. But if you look at these corn on the right side, you can see they're so diverse. They're just bursting with all this diversity. And, those are Native American traditional corn varieties. And they have all that diversity in them. And so here we have these engineered, targeted efficiency scale-up solutions from STEM. And here on the other hand, we have these, traditional knowledge-based diversity tending solutions. So that brings us to, here we have STEM. It's based on science. And we talk a lot about the science of climate change and believe the science, trust the science. But it's very increasingly clear to us that there's more than one way to do science. And Indigenous peoples are the original scientists. These navigators, Polynesian navigators, knew the waves and the currents and the stars, and they're just really fine-tuned to observing the world around them and interacting with it. And not controlling it, but just working with it to do the things that they wanted to do. And so that gives them very different kinds of solutions. So here you see, I don't know, that looks like Bernie Sanders to me, but but he's, this is Aboriginal wisdom in Australia and the controlled burns and how that is cultivating more diversity. It's checking dominant species, allowing more, rarer species to come through. It's creating more diversity of opportunities, and it's managing the landscape in a way that increases potential and possibility. So to orient you to how I even got into this, I was so inspired by Jane Goodall, like so many little girls were. And but what I loved about her most was the way that she did science in a way that was humble. She went into their world and she earned their trust on their terms. She didn't go to the zoo. She went to their world, and it took a lot of patience, a lot of humility, and a lot of respect to belong to their world and to understand it. So that was really what I set out to do. I wanted to be Jane Goodall. And I was, the other thing that struck me was that so clearly were these chimpanzees are relatives. We were so clearly related to them. And so if that was true, then obviously all the other animals, all the other plants, everything was related to us. So at a very young age, I was just struck by this life, all our relatives around us, and in Indigenous societies, that's how they speak of other organisms as all our relations. So that was really the foundation of the way that I approached this. And you could see all this diversity, all this life. It's enchanting, it's imaginative. It's really awakens some kind of imagination in us of things that can be, could be. And I grew up at the tide pools in San Diego, and so kelp forests and all of the life around, and really just participating in it, being in it. I went to Santa Cruz and studied the redwoods there, and you can see that all these redwoods really are competing for sunlight, right? And it's all redwoods, all one kind. So it's kind of like that efficiency structure. But what happens, I found, we had this narrative in science for so long in biology about survival of the fittest. And, that's not really what Darwin was saying, but it is the narrative that's come to the fore, that life is a competition, survival of the fittest. But in reality, it's not quite like that, because what's happening is that living things actually avoid wasting their life on competing. They avoid wasting their energy on it. And these are walking palms in Panama, where our Geoversity campus is. And if they don't have the right conditions of light, they just walk away. They walk away to somewhere else. And that's happening in every species all the time. We just go to where the opportunity is right. We avoid, predation. We just go for the low-hanging fruit. And that's the way that life really works. And in the process of that, you get all this diversity, get all these different species, and they're all taking on different roles in the environment, in the ecosystem. And they're becoming more and more specialized to a way of life. But all of them together create this vibrant ecosystem of possibility. And that's just such a deep pattern in the way that life works. And here you see in the beginning, in the primordial times, these plants were all aquatic. All the plants were aquatic. And they had very feeble roots. They really couldn't go onto the land. But these fungal networks supplemented their roots, and over time allowed the plants to move onto the land. And look today, the results of this partnership. 95% of the plants are supported by this relationship. And, that's the abundance that feeds us, that makes our lives possible, creates the oxygen that we breathe, everything. So this is a deep pattern in evolution and in life, that these generous assumptions are actually growing life's abundance. It's our cooperation, and that's a deep pattern. So it's not really a struggle for survival. It's becoming more unique and joining together in exchange. It's coevolution. We're shaping each other all the time. So here's this Darwin's moth, that he actually found this moth, and he said, oh my gosh, look how long this proboscis is. And he measured it, and he said, oh, there's got to be an orchid that it pollinates that has a nectary that long. And 100 years later, they found it. So we really are shaping each other. Species are shaping each other all the time. I ended up in Hawaii, and I was studying island biogeography. I was a huge fan of E.O. Wilson, and I had his book, MacArthur and Wilson, Island Biogeography, battered old thing. But just this idea that everything in these islands came there as, a foreigner, came there and found their way home. And how did they do that? They naturalized to this place. And how did that occur? And it seemed to me it was those relationships. It was that coevolution that brought them home in some sense. And so for me, I was I'm a first generation American. My parents are British, and we immigrated when I was, 2 years old. And so I was always trying, I think, to belong in that way that Jane tried to belong into the chimpanzee society. And these species are trying to belong in this new habitat. And so I think I was searching for those deep patterns. And now, we talk about, how are we going to come home to place? How are we going to live on this planet and remember how to live? So I think these processes are just deeply informative to us in how we can come home again and find our place on our planet. Like this, in this case, we are in between worlds where we've migrated so much and had migration done to us. There's so much trauma. How are we going to find our way home again and belong? So I ended up in my doctoral studies studying these baboons. So these are kind of the similar thing, where these are two very distinct populations. We thought they were species at that time. Now they're subspecies. And so they were hybridizing across a broad zone. So we were studying the way that they were actually adapting to change. And they had very different social structures. And it really affected the way that they cooperated and the speed of their adaptation to place. And so this gave me a lot of kind of foundational understandings about the way that we adapt, and the way our social structures and who we associate with and our choices that we make in our everyday lives actually create evolution and actually tune us to our places and each other. So in the middle is the gelada baboon that I did my master's on. And you might know about Dunbar's number. So Dunbar's number, he came up with that idea about, he realized that brain size was intertwined with group size. And he did that with these geladas. That research came out of that. So that's an interesting thing that we'll return to. I thought, what is it that's making us special, and how can we change? That was really my driving force. I wanted to know, where do we go wrong? Where's this knob that we can turn, this switch we can flip that would get us back on track and help us belong? So I thought it must be in our big brains, but I decided it wasn't. It was actually in our societies. It's the way that we interact with each other. So here, we chimpanzees are our closest relatives. Bonobos are also our closest relatives. So what are those deep patterns, and how did we change? What is unique to us? Where did this change? And so studying those baboons, it gave me this sudden insight that we are actually superorganism species, the same way that ants and honeybees are, and that we actually live in communities, and we actually all play a role in those communities. And selection is occurring more on that community level. It still occurs within us, between us, like it does with other species, but we actually have a collective future. We take care of each other's children, and we look out for each other. In foraging people, 75% of the food that they eat is acquired by someone outside their immediate family. That's weird, right? And babies understand fairness instinctively. If you have a plate of cookies and you share them unfairly with two older siblings, even a baby, a nonverbal baby, will look at you with shock, like, what are you doing? That's not right. They already know this. And so now we've seen that we actually choose the kindest, the nicest, most generous individuals that we trust if we have the agency. And so today you see that only sociopaths and the very most dominant individuals actually try to rule through force and fear openly. Most of us do it through subtle manipulation and more clever ways. And the real diagnostic to me, I think, is that other great ape mamas do all their own childcare, whereas globally we share half of it on average. So that's profoundly different. That is really a superorganism species. And to the extent where we have these grandmothers and grandfathers with long post-reproductive lives, and that's just very rare. You don't see that very many species. And it's really because we require that extended family, those other people, to help us with the childcare, because we're a superorganism. So we're more like ants and honeybees than our relatives, the chimpanzees or the bonobos, in the way that we structure our societies. But we're so bad at it. So here you see these termite mounds in Namibia. And it requires 0 fossil fuels for them to keep these structures within 1 degree Celsius all year round. It's pretty amazing. And, it's desert, so it's great fluctuations from day to night and seasonally. And meanwhile, it takes 20% of the world's energy to keep our cities within 1 degree Celsius. So what's the difference there? And here again, in the Netherlands, 70 million hours in traffic in a single year, whereas these leafcutter ants spend 0. So what is it that we're doing? Where do we fall off the path, right? Why are we not living into our superorganism potential? And so what I looked for in all these superorganism species for these deep patterns to try to figure out what it was that they're doing that we have, that we're not living into that full potential. And what I found is that it's a structural thing they do. The structure is their strategy. They're not telling each other what to do. They have a structure and they have a process, and it allows them to switch between efficiency and exploration. So here you see this is a slime mold. All these individuals are genetically unique, but they live as a colony. So some are going out and exploring, looking for food. And when they find it, they signal to their colony mates, go here efficiently. So they're doing both all the time. And they rely on collective intelligence to do it. So they're self-organizing around this shared purpose. No one's telling them what to do. They have multiple low investment experiments and this always on conversation where anyone can lay a trail or emit a signal. And then they share a language. So these simple if-then rules. You do this, I do that. It's sort of like a game of chess. And they work in these teams. So different teams are doing different things. They're specializing in different things. And overall, collectively, they can do far more things together. So what's stopping us? And, we've got these hierarchical societies. And, so how do we adapt when we've got this kind of thing going on? Because nature does use hierarchies all the time, but it's it's used to prevent change. So, cancerous cells are arising in our bodies all the time, but we have a hierarchical immune system that's removing them. And so hierarchies prevent change, and yet we've structured our societies this way. So here we have climate change, we have big things that need to happen quickly, but we can't do it because we're structured to prevent change. And why is that? I think it's that legacy of dominance. You have to have these deep patterns that you see in the other superorganisms, individual autonomy and reciprocity. They just do for each other on demand. They're not doing individual tallying. They know that the community is all working for the shared future. And it's equitable. Nobody's doing more work than someone else. They just all do their best in their own ways. And collectively, they do better. And that requires a lot of trust because you've always got parasites and cheats coming in. That's just a process that's always occurring in nature. So that's where Dunbar's number comes in, because that is the number of individuals we can keep track of to maintain that trust. And so for us, it's 150. We can keep track of 150 individuals and maintain the trust we need in our communities to do the things we need to do, to keep the reciprocity, to keep those things. And so here is a kind of a little framework that I created to summarize these kinds of processes. So you've got the community, and it's becoming more and more unique. It's going out, these individuals are going out and collecting the things they require, and they're doing it with collective intelligence in the teams. That's the functional piece. That's how they do it. But what's really important is that the sources have to be replenished. And so it's really this system. And when all these things are working, the community does well. And if any of one of these things improves, expands in capacity, the whole system expands, the whole community does better, the land does better, the sources increase, the nutrients they require increase. So this is the kind of system that we're looking at. And you can see that it requires that maintenance of equity among us. And so this is how we do it. Traditionally, this is how we do it. We have these commons that we work on together. We have defined boundaries. And this is not unlike a honeybee or an ant colony, that they have these territories. And with somewhat defined boundaries, the fair share membership. And then in humans, we monitor the health of the whole. We have transparency. And we distribute the accountability among ourselves. And you can see this in foraging societies, in any kind of commons. This is Eleanor Ostrom's work. And so she looked at, we have this idea of the tragedy of the commons, that it's inevitable. Our failure is inevitable. Anytime we're sharing a resource, we will destroy it. But it turns out that if you look around, we share all the time. We do it all the time. So what's wrong with the theory? And these are the rules that all these commons shared. And so these are deep principles that we can put into work in our communities to grow this. And this slow exile is important, the distributed accountability among ourselves. And then this whole community has to be respected. Its sovereignty has to be respected by the external forces, the other government that it's within, and the other lands around it. But so what's stopping us? And, we talked about the legacy of dominance. It's this parasitized mindset that we don't live in communities. We don't take care of each other. We don't even see each other's skills. Elders would have been looking and developing us for community well-being. We don't have that. And why is that? What is this parasitization? And so it's a deep pattern in superorganisms that these parasites, because they have this collective abundance, they attract parasites that want to take that. And this is happening all the time with ants and honeybees. So what they do is they actually use propaganda pheromones a lot of the time, where they'll produce a chemical that makes the host colony think they're under attack. And so they go crazy. They just start spinning around, and the parasitic queen nips into the colony and sterilizes the host queen. And then the workers feed her and take care of her offspring without realizing. And so this is really this deep pattern. These parasites take over the swarm creativity. They take over the host labor, and they take over the raw resources. Those resources are just getting fed to the parasite. And so they really just cut out that collective intelligence. They cut out the individual thought. And you can think of the zombie ants. And that's a cordyceps fungus that infects their brain and actually causes them to do what the parasite wants instead of work for their own reproduction and the colony's own reproduction. So you cut that out. You don't want individuals to think for themselves. You just want efficient delivery of the resources. So when this happens, there's really no incentive to keep investing in the symbionts, that the sources that replenish the nutrients. And so nobody takes care of them. The waste accumulates, it poisons the colony, and eventually that, eradicates the raw resources the colony depends on, and the parasite goes, to another colony. So this is a little terrifying to me. This looks a lot like our own lives. And I think some of these patterns are what's sourcing the problems that we're having with climate change. So this has been my work, is to try to create this teeming transformation. What are the switches, the flips that, what can we flip that would change this? I think at the highest level, it's rehumanizing our lives and our work, the way that we work. We evolved like every other species. We know this in our bones. We know how to do this. It's not rocket science. It's not STEM. It's the way we relate to our land and to each other. So what's required in this? We have to feel that we share a future, and that if we're all moving around all the time, how do we? We don't. We need to have place-sourced identities that come from a water source, that come from a story that we share, and elders that are seeing and developing us for our community. We've got right now the children are locked in school and the old people are locked in the home. How are we going to, teach the kids what's needed? And how are the kids going to teach the old people what's needed? How are we going to renew the things that we know in our bones? And how are we going to grow and protect those commons when we don't even have the permission to do it? We don't have control over our communities. If I want to go and reforest a freeway median, I'm probably arrested. So what's missing? I think it's, we don't have the information. We don't have the permission. We don't have the pattern mind, by which I mean, that's Joel Glansberg at Regenesis Institute talks about that. And it's just the familiarity and relationship with where you live, observing, experimenting, knowing how things work in a hands-on way. And we just don't have enough of that. Kids are, not out in the field. They're not trying things. They're not playing. All of that is so critical. And then, of course, that leads to imagination. Where's the curiosity and the creativity and considering other species, looking through other minds. I think with this STEM, and being a scientist, we're always looking through a microscope as an observer on a system. And we say, human nature connection, but we are nature, right? We are participants. So, and I think that's the difference between, academy, Western science, and naturalist science, like indigenous communities practice, that we're participants, we're in it, and that we're not looking through a microscope. And I think that imagination comes from considering those other perspectives, and that opens our minds to what's possible, and it awakens creativity and hope. So that's really the work that I've been trying to do. Because I think, Donella Meadows, the highest leverage points, okay, the structures that we live in, we're talking about that. Can we restore that community sovereignty and the equity among its members? Can we restore those deep processes by which we work. But at foundation, we're not going to have the will to implement those unless we actually have a shift in the way that we see the world, a worldview shift. And so that's a trickier thing, seeing with fresh eyes. So that's some of the work that I've been doing with Geoversity. And this started for me in 2020. We did this transcontinental journey, and this was with North American climate activists, Lakota activists. And we went with Kuna activists from Panama, Central America. Together, we went across the continent on human power. So it's only 35 miles there, but there's a mountain range in between. It's a serious thing. And so what was interesting to me is that some people were afraid of the dark or frogs or couldn't swim, or just even here, the familiarity with the living world was not there. And there was a sense of fear and unknown, and also fear of ridicule and how you would be perceived by others. And so I actually, I couldn't get to Panama because of the pandemic. And so I actually acquired this ranch, this 86-acre ranch in Borrego Springs, California. And the idea is to bring kids and leaders and future leaders here and give them an experience of living systems and orient them to our relationships with other species and looking through their eyes and playing, creativity, trying things, all these self-organizing things that we so rarely get a chance to experience in our lives these days. So I'm going to tell you about what I did with these kids. So just unleashing the imagination that we talked about, bringing them biomimicry, learning the miraculous genius that's all around us and within us all the time, and awakening possibility. Because, after 3.8 billion years, the failures are fossils. And what surrounds us is the secret to survival. So, going into the field, seeing these other species, looking through their eyes, it awakens possibility and a hope and agency, because we're still here, right? Our humanity is still within us. And I think, all of us have an indigenous soul, so to speak. We all lost we've been colonized and parasitized at some point in our histories, no matter who we are. And so, I think it comes to, can we remember what we are? Can we remember our humanity? And can we bring that forth? Because, it's the swamp of sadness, the swamp of despair. That's where we are right now. We're right here. And we have all the possibilities about to take off before us. So if the goal of our lives is to match our nature with nature, then the next question is, what nature, where? And I think it's all around us. It's within us. It's with our friends. It's with our relatives, our family, and our extended family, all our relatives. So when we look at Project Drawdown and Paul Hawken's list here, all these things, the way that we relate to our land, can we integrate with it? Can we come home to place? Can we, have all these things? And I saw, was an article in The Guardian about there's not enough land, there's not enough money to do all these things. It's just mathematically impossible. I say that's just a failure of imagination, because that's the way we're, evolved to live, is in our place with all these, creatures, with all our relatives. And it's a self-organizing process. I love this. As Paul Hawken says this, that these solutions are ready for us to choose. We have all these solutions already. So the job is really just to get out of the way and let it become, let our humanity come forth. That's the Team Lab. If you want to find out any more about what we're doing, that'd be where to go. And just, enjoy your place. Get out, get outside. Thank you all. I'm seeing the chat blow up. I'd love to see this. Yeah. Okay, Jim.
Thank you, Tamsin. Thank you so much. That was beautiful presentation of, really the biology out of which we come. I'd like to start, given the fact that this is, the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, and we're really focusing on climate change. I would love to hear from you your sense of what is at stake with climate, what you think the salient issues are that need to be discussed, and anything that you would like to add about the general code red emergency that in which we find ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's really terrifying to look at it. And to me, it is the most important issue that we face. But I also think that if we stay in that state, we become paralyzed. And it's, when you're looking on the TV and it's like the solutions are coming from somewhere else, some expert, the United Nations, somebody in charge, you lose that agency, and it's so easy to fall into hopelessness. And so what I'd like to see is for these solutions to be more grassroots. I'd like to see communities funded. I'd like to see communities learning the nature of their place. What are the stories that brought them together, all of our relatives together in the places we live, so that we, awaken that sense of being in the story together. Because, really, if we just made our places better, what our lives would be better regardless. So I think this whole climate thing is a little abstract and large for us than global solutions when they're really all around us in our backyard.
Yeah, and where do you come out, Tamsin, since we've never really talked before about this, but this is obviously an issue of real concern in terms of your own evaluation as a scientist. Many scientists believe that we've passed a point of no return, that escalating ecological turbulence is now here to stay. Others believe that we have a few years left. There was much discussion in 2020 that this decade is the critical decade for humanity to turn things around. Do you take the position that it's too late and therefore we have to adapt? Or do you take the position that the situation is remedial if we act in a particularly time-efficient way?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we've got to get a move on. We've got to do this. We can't just be more blah, blah, blah and these incremental solutions. We've got to make fundamental radical changes. But, this idea that we've passed the point of no return, that's based on linear scientific models. And what we know, I mean, as a biologist, we know these are complex living systems that can turn on a dime. We can change this ship. We totally can. But it's a radical change that needs to happen. And so, you asked about adaptation. Yeah, I think it is a matter of adaptation. And, changes are going to occur for sure. They're happening now. So it's growing that capacity in community to take care of each other and to adapt quickly on the ground. But it's also knowing that we have the power to change it if we claim it, claim the permission. Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Well, that's one of our mottos here at Ubiquity and Humanity Rising: proceed until apprehended.
There you go.
Let me just ask you one more question on, the COP, and then we can turn to teeming for the balance of our time. And that is, given your perspective, knowing that Joe Biden is going to Sharm el-Sheikh and various world leaders, if you were advising the governments of the world right now as to the single most important thing they can do in the next 10 days, or several things, what in your mind are the priorities that we need to attend to and address if we're to save ourselves?
Yeah.
What would be your advice to the governments?
I think it's a structural change in financing and attention to the grassroots. I think it's supporting communities, supporting Indigenous communities that are already doing the work, and looking for what's already working and doubling down on it. So I think, government, it's easy to want to fund big solutions, big technical solutions, and those are important. But I think that we just have to fund the relationships between people, community, and land on the grassroots. So that's what I would say, is that it's a structural change in where we put our funding and attention.
I think that's an important point, that if the governments were going to do one single thing, it's just to turn the whole system upside down and start to fund all the local initiatives, like we just saw with Sue Lennox with Oz Green. I mean, she's got hundreds of climate activists in 23 countries that are working their hearts out. Just imagine if they had, $1 million each to develop and scale.
It doesn't take much money on the grassroots.
Yeah.
We can work for cheap. We're used to working for cheap. It's not the same as a rocket ship to Mars or a giant umbrella covering the earth. Cheap. It takes growing trees, but the right trees, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That pattern mind of knowing your place, like knowing what's trying to become. And I think we're just so cut off from that. So, I mean, if it was me, I would take the money and I would put it into nature of place research in communities, that was crowdsourced by children and by people on the ground, bringing the children and the elders back together and rehumanizing our minds.
Right. Because I think it's clear that we're past the point of no return with the governments doing anything.
They can't do it. They can't.
Yeah. And if they would just empower the people to do the obvious at the local level, synergize what's working, we could probably solve our problems by the end of the decade.
I think
or around that time.
And imagine the flowering, like the renaissance of creativity that would come from that. Just so energizing.
Well, thank you for that. Let's turn now to your subject of the superorganism. And I'd like to start with an observation that you made in your extraordinary book, which I recommend to everyone, just called Teeming, Teeming, by Tamsin. How unique superorganisms are in nature. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about, the emergence of superorganisms and why you consider humanity a superorganism, because most of the species, the upper primates and so forth and so on, are not. And so this is a rare quality in nature, at least if I understood your book correctly. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, it is very rare. I mean, there's only, ants, honeybees, termites, social, wasps and that. Then there's, among mammals, the only other superorganism that we, scientists would recognize would be the naked mole rats that have a bizarre little life. But we're really kind of converging on that. We've definitely, and so what as an anthropologist, I was always trying to understand what is the nature of our species. And so you go down that road of, okay, looking at our closest relatives. And at some point you realize what's happened is a change in our social structure, like a fundamental change. And you see that kind of social structure in the social insects. So us trying to jam our understanding of ourselves into this primate model that we have, it seems, like a no-brainer. And of course, all of that is within us. But I think then we end up in this competition model and looking at dominance and thinking that that's normal for us. And it's not. That's not the way that we live.
Well, I know that Rianne Eisler and a number of anthropologists and cultural historians would agree with you around dominance. And I think the question that I have around that is that we see dominance in the upper primates. So in a certain way, as you've pointed out, which I thought was one of the more interesting points about your book, in some ways, the complexity of being human is that we have a legacy from a dominator model from the upper primates. Yeah. And we have a legacy from the ants and the honeybees, which is a more decentralized, and that both these aspects are in us and war against each other, given how we interact in our situations and so forth. And would love to have you speak more about this double helix in the human psyche, because I think that's both the source of our problem, if I understand what you were writing correctly, but also the source of our solution, if we would get it together within this larger teeming framework.
Yeah, this is actually what tipped me off to our superorganism structure, is looking at those baboons and the Hamadryas baboons that have a lot of cooperation with each other. They put a lot of energy into these appeasement gestures. They're always going, hey, no, it's okay. Like, I'm not dominating you. But it's like, please and thank you, and smiling that we do. And so I thought, that's interesting. We have these appeasement gestures. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. Dominance is within us and always in the background, and we mediate it in each other. It's negotiated with each other, so that, rarely can you come in and just be dominant. Usually you have to wear a mask and be dominant in more subtle ways, and we check each other, right? And so our communities do better. We all do better when we do that, but it's negotiated. And so I thought it was interesting, like Tyson Yunkaporta talks about, narcissism and runaway narcissism. So I see that it's always there within us, and we have to check it in each other all the time. But if you let us, we'll run away with it. And I feel like that's the situation we got. It's Genghis Khan at scale. And so how do you get back to that? I think it has to be working at that Dunbar's number kind of level, where we can kind of check each other. I think it's bringing the elders back.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the Dunbar number, I had another question that came to my mind as I was reading the book, and that is, I think what you're saying is kind of manifestly true, that we have a range of about 150 individuals that we can personally know, and some of the most egalitarian societies, in the indigenous world, have just naturally or intentionally limited themselves to around that number. And within that context, there's a certain inherent democratic egalitarian impulse that just naturally arises. And yet, on the other hand, you've got these ants and these bees that have, thousands of individual insects all working together in seeming complete harmony. Right. So how do you understand the Dunbar limitation to 150 against the backdrop of these ant colonies of millions of ants, or these beehives with thousands and thousands of bees that seem to have figured out social and ecological harmony?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're primates, so we have that legacy. And so, humans have the biggest brains of any other primate. And it's because I think we were trying to manage bigger and bigger networks. And at some point, then you look at the ants, and they've done away with that model. Yes, they have larger brains than their ancestors. But at some point, they don't invest in brain size, they invest in community. And so that is the tipping point to the superorganism society. And so I think we're sort of on that, because our brains can't get any bigger and make it through the birth canal. So I think there has been a fundamental shift, maybe our brains are in our phones now and our brains are shrinking. But yes. And so I wonder, we have these limitations of these community sizes. But is there a way to have global superorganisms? Is there a way for us to network larger than that? And maybe there is, we've got all this computing power, maybe we can converge on that. But what I see that's remains the same with the ants and the bees is they have these territories and they have a shared purpose. They have a shared future and they share the reproductive future. So that is the limiting factor, I think.
Yeah. And then, the question that I have, I know you make the point that it's all about structure in a fundamental way that the other species have figured out and we still need to figure out. Although as I look at human history, we've tried every conceivable structure and none of them seem to actually work very well over time. And so I wonder, is it because of our brain size and therefore our capacity for individualized thinking to such a degree that mitigates against the effectiveness of structure? How do you understand why structure works so well in a bee colony, but humans don't seem to be able to do it either at small scales or large scales in a way that endures and kind of globalizes?
Well, I mean, so some of those structures, the Bushmen have been living that way for 50,000 years. So it does endure. Those small structures are very enduring and successful. And how do they live? It's really, nomadic bands and camps. If you don't like the people you're with, you move away. Yes, you know each other. Yes, you're related, whatever. But there's just this agency, this personal agency. And so I think what the difference is, because we're primates, if that dominance impulse gets run, if we allow it to run away, it's a runaway system. And then, we can't maintain the egalitarianism we need to function that way. And so I think civilizations are inherently unstable. But I also think that we have, agency and intelligence, and we make the right decisions for ourselves. Like there's such a, I studied with Paul Ehrlich for a while. And I just thought that was so interesting that he had this epiphany that people make good choices for themselves. So he had an idea of overpopulation was the problem. But what he realized was that when you educate women and girls and give them the power to make decisions, they make good decisions about their family size and where they live and all that. And so it's really becomes more preserving and protecting the conditions where people can make decisions, where they have autonomy and agency. That Graeber and Wengrow book, Dawn of Everything, is so interesting. Every kind of society works in humans. We're very flexible. We're adapted to having culture. It doesn't matter what kind. But in terms of stability and peace, like our personal peace and, having enough food and housing security and all that, it happens at that small scale, I think.
Yeah. With 8 billion people on the planet, this question of the Dunbar number and scale really becomes acutely important, because one wonders how we can honor the small within the context of a burgeoning large in a world that's becoming more and more interconnected with each passing day, so that the human race at one level is becoming an 8 billion person superorganism through all the interconnections that we've got, what Peter Russell called the global brain. And yet at a micro level, we can basically deal with no more than about 150 people. And as you point out, the Aboriginals that have been going for 50,000 years and hunter-gatherer are extremely small scale. So
Right.
it's just our birth rate has mitigated against some of the solutions that seem so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, I think when you have overcrowding in species, disease comes in, and I guess we've seen that as well.
Mm.
So those kind of numbers things kind of check themselves if you look at other species. So and the other thing that you see is that we actually have the capability to support those societies. It's just a matter of integrating with the life, like the Guardian was saying that there's not enough land for agriculture, nature, indigenous cultures, and these carbon plantations. And I'm like, but they don't have to be exclusive. In fact, they can't be. That's the change we need to make. It has to be integrated. And how do we do that? Maybe that global brain can help us do that, but only, I think, if it preserves individual autonomy and works on shared purpose, which comes from a shared water source and a shared future and a shared story.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Tamsin, thank you so much. And as I said, everyone, Tamsin's going to be back each day talking with the youth and with Rhea Salter and the Facing Future TV that's going to be bringing live reports from Sharm el-Sheikh starting tomorrow, and then interacting with our various guests. Tomorrow we have Linda Tucker. Many of you know her from her various appearances on Humanity Rising. She's the one who has really dedicated her life to the protection of the white lions there in South Africa through the Timvavati Reserve. She is an extraordinary woman, a scientist, passionate about the ecology, and is single-handedly, with the people that she has inspired, has really saved the white lions from extinction, and for what they call, canned farming, where they just keep them in cages, and then these big hunters come in and just shoot them. So it's not even in the wild. And Linda Tucker will be telling us that story and sharing what she believes the white lions can teach humanity today as part of the apex species in the wilds there in Africa. So that'll be our program tomorrow. Again, we apologize for Zoom and some of the complications people had in getting on today. We hope to have it rectified tomorrow. But again, for those of you who had challenges and are listening by other means, any of the links that you receive day by day, because we send out the links every day, it's the same link. So if you can retrieve something from a link from last week, it also works. It's not a new link every day. So you can just keep the same one and use it on a daily basis. So that'll bring our program to a close. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. Tamsin, thank you. You've been inspiring. And I love your singular advice to the government's gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh. Turn it over to the kids.
Yeah.
Turn it over to the local groups. They've got the solutions. They just need empowerment and resourcing. I can't think of a better piece of advice to the world leadership at this moment than what you provided today. So thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you, Jim. I can't wait to see everybody all through the week, and I can't wait to see Linda.
Yes. All right, everyone, that brings us to a close for today. Bye for now. See you tomorrow.